Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Rowan Lemley. If you're here to listen to a webinar called Maximize Your P2P Potential with Metrics That Drive Results, you are in the right place. We've got 50 minutes for this, so we're not going to wait for anybody. There's a whole crowd of you already online, and we're just going to jump into it. So let me tell you what we're going to do. A little bit of housekeeping. I'll do a brief introduction of TradeShift. And then I'm going to hand over to that good-looking guy you can see in the window opposite me, Andrew Bartolini. Andrew, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a couple of slides, and then we'll just hopefully have a really good discussion. We'll talk about P2P in 24. Um, we'll hone in on those metrics that really matter. And it says Q&A at the end. I want to just tell the entire audience that you guys can ask any question you want throughout. If I can work it into the conversation, I will. And if I can't, I will absolutely answer your questions after the fact. So there's me, Rowan Lemley. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at TradeShift. And as said, Andrew, you can introduce yourself in a second. A little bit of housekeeping first. We're going to aim for 50 minutes here. And I think we can do that. But if not, that's why it's 50 minutes, because if we go over, then we're not going to wreck anybody else's next call. Everyone's muted. Don't worry about that. That's just the way we do things here. Ask questions anytime. And as said, we'll answer it by email if we don't get to it. If you don't have a question, but you have a comment, I sometimes find we don't necessarily have questions. We've just got comments. Pass that on. And again, I'll try to weave it into the conversation because I find it's really interesting if you've had an experience that you want to share with the group. Share it with us and I'll try to work it in. Also, if you got to jump off or if you're not here, then you're gonna be getting this as a recording by email. So don't worry about that. And then lastly, I want to point to a report that we're using as source material. It's only part of the source material, but it's from Ardent Partners. Fantastic piece of work. It's called AP Metrics That Matter 2024, and you can find it under our resources page. So that's housekeeping. I'll do a super quick intro of TradeShift, only for those people who don't know us, and then we'll get to the meat of the conversation. So if you don't know anything about us, TradeShift is it's a network, it's a platform, it's a platform for e-invoicing, payables automation, procurement, marketplaces, and embedded finance. We're in about 190 countries. By that, I mean there are people on our platform, companies on our platform that are sending invoices, receiving orders across 190 countries, which is pretty amazing. There's about 240 billion US dollars in GMV and 3 million invoices monthly. Lots of customers, disproportionately large amount of suppliers, as you'd expect. And we're building up the network at about 15,000 new connections each month. So it's a really dynamic place. That's TradeShift. That's all I'm going to say. Andrew, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Rowan. Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Bartolini. I'm the founder and chief research officer at Ardent Partners. I'm also the primary author of the report or ebook that TradeShift is going to make available. I've worked in the industry for about 25 years, the last 15 leading the charge at Ardent Partners. For those of you that aren't familiar with who we are, we're a research and advisory firm or an industry analyst firm. It's laser focused on the source to pay process, right? So the entirety of what we do is focused on sourcing, procurement, supply management, and accounts payable. Mentioned we've been in the market for 15 years, coming to the end of our 15th year. We do, as examples, we do research focused on technology and technology evaluations. We also do a very large amount of market research, some of which we're going to share with you right now. And so I'm pleased to be here. And Ron, I think I'm in the right place. So we're going to talk a little bit about, to start, P2P in 2024, right? And so with the events in the United States this week, right, it's going to be, another interesting couple of years as we see shifts in policy, as we see shifts in the world, as we see shifts in what organizations are focused on and prioritizing, and as a result, shifts in what is important for procurement and AP and all of P2P to be prioritizing and executing on. So let's take a quick look, right? So we talked a little bit about Ardent Partners AP Metrics That Matter. We do a Metrics That Matter ebook series each year, one focused on AP, one focused on procurement, drawn from practitioners globally. You can see here that there's two distinct studies. The data does tilt towards North America, but includes a large component from Europe, particularly Northern Europe. And then it is, drawn from companies of all sizes, but does tilt towards large enterprise. So that said, let's just dive in, right? So, if we were to look at where we were 10 years ago versus where we were 5 years ago, there's a pretty dramatic shifts in the world, right? Driven, in large part by the global pandemic, which changed the way that companies organized, which changed the amount of pressure that was placed on supply chains. When you look at all of the factors since the Great Recession, 2008, 2009 timeframe, and for the decade that followed, so many things were positively at the backs of procurement and P2P teams, right? Global trade and the ease of which, trade was being facilitated globally. We have shifted pretty dramatically. Rather than listing all the things that were, behind us, right? We'll talk a little bit about some of the headwinds, right? The pandemic, I think, certainly shifted our views of having global supply chains. But in the aftermath of that, right, we've been dealing with significant inflation, which in different parts of the world is still continuing on, lower than it had been, but has been a major challenge, particularly for procurement organizations that have shifted their focus away from quality and growth, with a little bit more focus on cost and savings. One of the ways that the central banks of the world have challenged the high inflationary environments that we've been experiencing is raising interest rates, right? And so this means that what had been a very long period of time where companies, large enterprises, very specifically, could borrow at a very low cost or almost no cost. That has changed. It doesn't appear that we're going to be going back that way, and that has placed much more importance, or there's a greater financial impact in how cash is managed, right? So many of the things that were easier now are challenges today, but also makes the world very exciting. When we look at overall performance, right, and how both procurement and AP have performed more recently, we can see that both professions, both functions, both groups within the organization, continue on an upward trajectory, right? You can see here that, only 6%, but still, it's a nice number, or nice to consider that procurement can actually deliver game-changing results. But in general, the pace of procurement and what procurement has been delivering, over the past couple of years, right, in the 2020s, amidst this structural change, has been positive. And I think the same can also be said for AP, right? So when I think about the two functions, right, procurement, the bigger brother in the relationship has gained significantly more momentum over the years, right? If I were to look at the arc of my time working in procurement and AP, we have gotten to a point now where there's a C-level profession. There's a C-level leader of a procurement organization. AP has continued to follow the path that procurement has blazed, a little bit slower, and maybe the trajectory is not as high. But what you can see here is that you have almost 2/3 of all organizations starting to view their AP department, which was one time siloed, one time very tactical, one time highly manual, as something that's either very or exceptionally valuable.
Andrew, quick question, just for me, anyways. I've been in the industry a while as well. Maybe not as long as you, but certainly close. I've noticed in Europe, AP has often and finance has often led things like procure to pay processes, whereas in the States, The opposite is true.
Mhm.
It's more often than not been procurement led. Is that changing? Is that changing at all, do you think?
So I think that that is a function of company size, right? So when you get into sort of large global companies with large global supply chains, procurement becomes a larger component of the overall operation. Whereas in Europe, you're more likely to have slightly smaller companies,
Mm.
and procurement really does emanate out of finance traditionally. So I don't know that it's changing or shifting. I think that what is important, or the thing that has shifted, is that more organizations are thinking about their P2P process, not necessarily as a single department or operation, but as a single supplier relationship, as a single transaction. And so it's become increasingly important for both groups on AP and procurement, whoever's in the lead position, to be considering the other one as they're thinking about investments in talent, as they're thinking about investments in systems, as they're thinking about how they communicate with the supplier market.
True.
Right. So one of the things that has made AP and procurement a much more interesting place to be over the past couple of years is the emergence of our, and I guess we're at our contractually obligated section to talk about AI. Right. It is as an analyst, right, you've got to, it's AI everywhere all the time. The reality is that in our lifetimes, there have been a few new technologies that have emerged that have really been transformational, right? I think the one that I most think about when I think about AI is the internet itself, right? When we move from a world in the early 90s to the early 2000s, right? A pretty dramatic and fundamental shift in how companies do business. Move to the cloud, I think, was also significant, but what we're on now is the cusp of this next transformational technology. And the great thing about AI is how you're going to be able to access it over the next couple of years, right? You're going to be able to use these capabilities within the applications that you're already using to manage your sourcing, to manage your POs, to manage your invoices, to manage your payments. AI is bringing new life to old processes. And, as the world enters this new technological innovation era, this emergence of AI and what it's going to do, I've got a couple more slides that I got to delve down a little bit more into, how companies are starting to use AI. Really, that companies are already starting to use AI, and where the leverage points are across the P2P process. So let's bounce ahead one more here, right? So earlier this year, right, we did research that looked at both procurement and AP, and what we found was that both organizations were already using AI capabilities, right? I think it's important to think of AI not as its own technology, right? Not as its own technology stack. Let's go out, let's buy some AI, bring it back into the organization, but really as a set of capabilities that are and can be and will be embedded into the systems that you're using, and really used to enhance what it is that you're able to do today in a variety of ways. But what we saw earlier this year was about a third of procurement organizations were already using AI. And as you can see here, we're coming up towards the end of the year. Almost three-quarters of all organizations plan to be using those capabilities at some level this year. The numbers on the AP side are similar, and what this means is that if you're not thinking about AI, you need to reconsider that, because AI is starting to emerge in a bunch of different ways. And the reason why we believe that AI is and will be transformational is the value that it delivers, right? We're really in the first innovation wave of many, right? AI technology is beginning to simulate human intelligence and problem-solving capabilities, right? AI enables systems to execute tasks that would otherwise require human intervention. So P2P teams, large and small, are starting to see some benefits from AI technologies like machine learning, deep learning, and generative AI. And the opportunities that we see in the immediate term, right, is that AI can be a P2P, an EP, a procurement force multiplier by driving efficiencies simply by automating more processes and sub processes, right? So taking an extra 15% of the manual activity out of a standard process, as an example. AI has the opportunity to drive more engagement and spend capture and system usage, right? One of the challenges that P2P systems have is not only driving internal adoption, but making sure that suppliers adopt the systems as well. When these systems are able to provide information in the context of each of those users and improve the experience, they're much more likely to return and use them. And then AI has the power to provide information that can guide organizations to make smarter decisions. And we're on the path towards being able to do things that are much more predictive and driving better outcomes. So Rowan, right? I mean, Tradeshift obviously a big player in the P2P space. As a technology company, there has to be an AI story. Tell us a
Sure.
little bit about what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Like everyone, and kind of like you described, it's its own thing. It's its own technology. We've got people looking at it. We actually embedded AI back in the platform back in 2017, so maybe an early adopter back then, but I don't
Mhm.
think our real strategy kicked off until maybe in the last, say, 12, 18 months.
Yeah.
Um, but we use AI to replace business rules, so auto coding, auto flow, auto approvals, matching. Like you said, it's a little bit more intelligent than say the old business rules, and so there's more flexibility there around the action and the intelligence that executes the action. And then we're using it for things like putting a chat bot onto the platform to just answer any of those questions. Like, I don't know, how can I set up self-billing, or how can I do three bids and a buy, that
Right.
kind of thing. And that actually saves a lot of time and money. I use ChatGPT for the exact same thing. It's just incredibly powerful. But what I think is super interesting is this this thing that's going on right now. We're basically delivering it or developing it right now, and that's a plugin to Amazon's Quick Sites. So it's a generative AI analytics tool, and I mean we can go ahead and build dashboards and things with it, but you can literally just type in, what's my average invoice cycle time, and it'll produce you like basically a small dashboard showing you different views of your invoice cycle
Right.
time. You can drill in. That blows my mind because that makes me think of all the work that's been done with, say, Tableau and in the past,
Mhm.
Tableaus and QuickBooks and, the building of reports. And now you can just ask and get the number that you want. I mean, that's quite something. That's quite something. Haven't seen that
I,
before.
I, yeah, I mean, absolutely right. And and for those of you listening in, right, I mean, the path of where AI will eventually be and where it is today, right, it's going to take, multiple revolutions to get there, right? I think sometimes there's a perception that, you start to use AI and there's no involvement and everything is done and you're at the end of a process that normally took 6 months and it's done in 3 minutes. The reality is right what Rowan is talking about in what Tradeshift is doing today, right? It's carving out, parts of the process and automating them more quickly, right? We talked about, what you're doing there with approvals. It's providing more intelligence to the users in the context of their operation, right? It's going to know who that user is and what they're likely to be doing, and it's going to, just sort of push valuable information to them. As we start to move down over time, right? AI is going to start to, be delivering insights and information and guidance that couldn't otherwise be done by humans, right? And that's where like sort of the larger power of these systems is going to really begin to shift how organizations think about their business and organize them, and that's within P2P. So And one of the things that we've seen over the years is that AP has become more strategic, right? I showed you a few slides ago how almost two-thirds of organizations really are starting to value AP as an independent function, and for a variety of reasons. The cash management piece and the cost of capital being one that is only going to continue to drive that discussion forward, or drive that viewpoint forward. But one of the things that we see here in our research, right, and so we've been doing research at Ardent Partners for 15 years, and really have done deep analysis of AP and procurement. 10 years ago, even, 6 or 7 years ago, AP's major focus for what their priorities were for any given year was to become a more efficient organization, right? It was reduced processing costs, and nothing else was that important. What we see now is that there's a much greater understanding, as you can see from the list of priorities here, that AP cannot is not only a hub of process excellence. It can be a hub of business intelligence and value for the rest of the organization. But AP, not without its challenges, right? AP definitely has a bright future. I would say that for anybody working in P2P today, there's really never been a better time to be working in P2P because of the investment in the function, because of the tools that you now have available to you in the marketplace, if not within your own organizations. But challenges still exist, right? Exceptions. Getting the process streamlined and completed, right, are challenges. And when I look at these hurdles, right, the underlying element is that there's still too much manual activity. Rowan, you've got a huge amount of AP customers at TradeShift. Do you see similar challenges that they're facing, or what resonates here?
So, so all of these absolutely resonate. These are the day-to-day grind, but the companies are really pushing us to develop e-invoicing compliance because most of our, or a large portion of our customers are international, if not global,
Right.
whether they're based in the United States or Kuala Lumpur, it doesn't necessarily matter. They've got suppliers all around. And so we've got I don't know how much of the audience knows about the rising tide of clearance models going through Europe and Asia. So like in the last, I don't know how many months, six or so months, we've seen like Poland, Malaysia, Romania, um, France,
Mhm.
Germany, not a clearance, but still like
Yeah.
e-invoicing compliance rules coming in. And so while everything that's listed here is absolutely every single day, those compliance rules are serious and they're complex. And that's a conversation that is right at the top for us and our customers right now.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, right? The global invoicing mandates that we've seen rolled out can be, very confusing, right? If you were to look at like what's going on in Germany, it's if you don't have to be a company based in Germany, but having suppliers in Germany, the regulations and requirements of your company size and the types of business that you're in, the guidance as to what you're supposed to do now and over the next 2 to 3 years, it can be daunting. And where
Mm.
systems can come into play, and where solution providers that have this expertise can come into play, is that they can guide you through these to avoid non-compliance events, which do have financial penalties. So AP's biggest hurdles. Shift over to the view of the CPO. We have been, for a very long period of time, right? So I mean, procurement and savings will always be, connected at the hip. It is the metric that procurement uses to evaluate itself. At the top of the list, it is the metric that the rest of the organization, particularly the CFO, uses to evaluate procurement's performance. In periods of fast growth and less pressure on the bottom line, and more of a focus on quality and growth, savings had been less important. We've seen a dramatic shift in how procurement organizations are thinking about and prioritizing savings over the last couple of years, right? Over the last 2 years, the number of CPOs that have prioritized savings over everything else has doubled. And so we're back in a tougher economic period, right? Based in large part on inflation. And it's just interesting to see that, you know, when organizations look at challenging markets, they revert to trying to control the things that they can best control, and they look to procurement to deliver more savings. And this is a trend that we don't see going away in the near term. Risk management in the aftermath of the pandemic and all of the outages that we saw, I think is front and center. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years. ESG has a much stronger foothold in Europe. There are a lot of organizations, though, or in the rest of the world in North America, that are also prioritizing ESG, even if they're not marketing it as broadly. Again, here with procurement, right, the challenges also, you know, these are the classic challenges, right? How do we get more influence and engagement, right? If you look at sort of the drivers of value, having procurement engaged at the beginning of a sourcing process, they can deliver significantly more value, whether that's savings, whether that's impact on the bottom line. Budget constraints is something that may lessen as we move forward now, as organizations are now managing in, at least with some acknowledgement that inflation may be a part of the plan over the next year, over the next couple of years. Rowan, right? So we talked about AP. When we think about procurement, right? So back at you, right? These are new hurdles, but the same question. When you look at your customers, what are they facing?
Yeah. Well, I think this and the previous slide are like spot on. I mean, the previous slide for me was all about risk. ESG, there's a bit of risk mitigation there, obviously straight up risk mitigation, and then savings. Like I could tie that back to an organization being risk averse, right? And then
Mhm.
I look at these challenges here, and all of these are risks to the investment of a new procure to pay system, conceivably. Um, Whether or not you engage stakeholders, whether or not you find budget. I mean, those can be tied to the success of your digital transformation project,
Sure.
aligning processes and systems. I remember a Gartner report some years back, and it pointed to some like 83% of digital transformation projects fail. And it was essentially because the complexity of the project is hard to manage, and all of these things are hard to manage. And then, of course, managing suppliers and supply. I mean, this
Mhm.
is one of the things that TradeShift really tries to focus on in terms of connecting suppliers and their buyers and vice versa, so that they can, collaborate, transact, and grow. But it's at the nub or it's at the crux of, are you successful or not in your procure to pay process? So I couldn't point to any one of these, but I
Mhm.
would say risk aversion is top of the ticket for sure.
Yeah, and in the current environment, it's only going to continue, right? We have things that we haven't had to deal with as P2P professionals, right? So it's inflation, it's global conflict that's impacting supply chains. It is shifts in trade policy, which also have an impact that or add layers of complexity in managing and operating a global supply chain and managing those relationships as well. So
One thing I might just add in, and just a question for you. So
yep.
I'm seeing the sort of the risk aversion, the level of risk aversion, um, being higher now than it was pre-pandemic. It became high and it stayed
Mhm.
high, and I
Yeah.
just haven't seen the level of investment that was pre-pandemic lately.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what happened during the pandemic, and maybe it's mostly related to sort of operations, as a result of shutdowns and we've seen more outages, right? And so, while I mentioned, savings is the top procurement metric. And there's a lot of challenges in using that metric, or focusing too much on that metric, because so many things happen outside of procurement's control. But supply assurance is job one for P2P operation, right? And so there is, there's this challenge now where supplier, right? So there are inflationary costs, and then there are also suppliers that are seeing opportunities to raise their prices and increase their own bottom lines. And it's been a difficult period of time for procurement to get to a point where they're comfortable moving away from a source that can absolutely deliver. And so there's, um, there has been less global sourcing or more broad sourcing, and sort of the ability to let's shift supply away. And there's been more acceptance of these price increases. So,
It's a difficult world. We've got war in Europe, war in the Middle East,
Mhm.
um, a slowdown in Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, anyways,
It's
not to
it,
belabor a point.
yeah, right. It's a structural change, and the challenges that aren't going away anytime soon, right? Used to say that, the arc of global trade was moving towards free trade. We may now be deal, procurement in particular, but also AP, right? We talked about the global invoicing challenges and the complexity. It now does matter where your suppliers are located. It does impact your processes on the AP side. On the
Yep.
procurement side, it may impact the costs that you're expecting to pay, and not simply from logistics, but with the potential introduction of tariffs, it becomes a much harder world to navigate. Which is why, if you're automating your systems, and you have sort of the backbone of why you've made the decisions that you've made, and who you're working with, and what those relationships are, and all of that is straightforward, and captured and codified, you're going to be able to better shift in response to those market dynamics. So the metrics part of the presentation, right? So a little bit of the backdrop. We expect that there's going to be more of the same of what we've experienced this year, moving into next year. But let's look at some of the metrics. What's the level of paper activity in the market versus electronic? And so it's different by region of the world, certainly, right? The United States is behind the rest of the world, and Europe specifically, when it comes to the level of electronic transactions. What I'm showing you here, and this is something that we've been tracking sort of at the global level for 15 years, and I was even doing it, closer to 20 years with another firm. It's only been for the past couple of years that there have been more invoices submitted electronically than submitted manually, right? And so, what is a manual invoice in our categorization, right? That would include mail, that would include email, that would include fax. There are companies that are still faxing invoices, if you can believe that. So any type of non-electronic transmission of information, right? So not from system to system, or not directly into system. We've also seen, right, so on the payment side, right, so something similar as well, right? I think, Ron, you were saying, right, you haven't seen, a manual payment in, I don't even know how long, but a long
Wow.
period of time. Ardent Partners still gets checks in the mail from our customers. But what we are seeing, and again, so global view of the world, there are more electronic payments made by a sizable amount. Now, this accounts for the percentage of payments as opposed to the dollars that are transacted. And so when you have more smaller transactions, that may be on card, that accounts for the difference between this and the invoicing number. Now, some of the key metrics, right? So the average organization today spends less than $10 to process a single invoice. That number is an all-inclusive number, right? So that includes your staff and operating costs and overhead. That would recover the receipt, processing, and approval, of your AP operation, your AP department. We have seen, a nice slow and steady shift of this number moving down over the years, but still plenty of room for improvement, right? So when you read the ebook that Tradeshift is going to present to you, right, we include some best-in-class numbers, right? And so the top performers in the market are driving significantly lower costs than what you see here. Invoice processing time. Average time to process an invoice is about 10 days, right? So it's about $10, about 10 days for the typical AP function. Um, they still are experiencing significant bottlenecks, right? The challenges around approval times was the top AP challenge, right? So lots of opportunities for improvement, right? High level AP doing well, doing better, can do even better. And again, as your systems start to leverage more AI capabilities, we expect to see some improvements in these numbers, over the next 2 or 3 years to be pretty significant. Invoice exception rate, right? It's a number that's still way too high. Um, and it's here that I like to sort of underline the point of the importance of having systems to process your invoices, right? To process your purchase orders, your invoices, and your payments. We have many organizations that are still working in a world where they are seeing a number of, it's almost, it's about 1 in 5 of invoices that are kicked out of the process. Something has to be done. There has to be some level of management on that specific invoice. If you're not utilizing a system sort of holistically to manage the process, it's very likely that your team is solving the same challenges over and over again, right? Solving the same challenges over and over again. And the way to really drive down your costs is to reduce this number. So straight through processing, right? So often described by Ardent Partners as the holy grail of AP and P2P teams. It is the desired future state for all AP organizations, right? That the transaction comes in, there's not a lot of need for any type of rekeying information and checking out all of the things that human processes where errors can come into the fold. I think that we've seen this number as a metric for your organization is a good one to understand, not simply how efficient you are, but how effective the systems you have are working, and how well you've communicated requirements to suppliers. Ron, it's just a number here, but obviously you're probably tracking how Tradeshift customers are doing. This is
Yeah.
the average in the marketplace. What do you think about this number? How does it compare?
I think it's interesting. I was thinking about this before this call, before this webinar, and the so obviously that's an average. It doesn't the devil is in the details.
Sure.
So different companies have the potential to achieve much different results. We have a few hundred customers who do EDI. That's going to be 99 point something percent straight through. That's a system to system.
Right.
It's not what the average company does. Um, but I did ask our guys to look into it, and somewhere between 40 and 80. 80 would be the high end of our customers who have like basically all of their invoices relate to orders, and they're able to get really good matching rates. And then some are only around 40%. But of course, you've got the average there. All of our
Mhm.
customers have essentially a state-of-the-art system. So
Right.
they're going to be a little bit higher and better. But I think the main thing for the audience to understand is that any system, Tradeshift's, anybody else's system, I don't want to say anybody's, but there's a there's a bunch out there. The invoices are going to come in. We're going to try to fully automate every single one of them first. If we can't fully automate it, meaning straight through processing, we're going to try to find something on the invoice that allows us to partially automate it. Some reference code, something like that. We can connect it to an order, but the amounts don't match. But we can still copy the coding. We can basically figure out who to workflow it to. So that's partial automation. And the last thing we want to do is see a manual an exception, like a true exception, be handled. But that's what the system is going to do. Is going to try to automate everything. When it fails, it's going to try to partially automate it what it can. It'll use AI, it'll use business rules, machine learning, whatever. And then last resort is we don't know anything about this invoice. It just showed up and a human actually has to look at it. So 32%, that just means like a 32% of invoices you don't have to touch at all. And if last year it was 20%, well, then you probably just saved 1 or 2 FTEs, depending on your invoice volume. So it's not bad.
Yeah.
32%, not bad, but it could be better.
Yeah. Again, I mean that's the AP story. Continues to improve, as we look at things over, a group of years. But still a long way to go.
Yeah.
Another area where there's a long way to go is this metric here, right? Which basically says that, the allocation of about 1 out of every 5 days, 1 day a week is the amount of time that your average AP staffer is spending responding to supplier inquiries, right? And so, one of the reasons why organizations are thinking about their P2P systems and operations more holistically is all the challenges they've had in managing a global supply chain, right? There are now capacity constraints in certain industries that, don't that I don't want to say that they're permanent, but they're going to have to be constantly managed, right? And so when you are and have become the high cost problematic customer, where the main conversations are happening between an accounts receivable department and an AP department, that's not where you want to be as a customer, right? Particularly with your strategic suppliers. And so what happens, right? If you don't have a system that allows your suppliers to view in a self-service way, has the invoice been received? Are there issues with that? Has it been approved? When am I getting paid? Right? It's a challenge, right? So those calls into AP, right, who don't have those systems as well, right? The responses that they're coming back to their suppliers are not going to be timely. They may be accurate, they may not be, but it's not adding any value to the overall process. And it's something that really needs to be considered as you start to move forward, right? It's the introduction of bots and things where supplier can simply just, type in a question and get the response, facilitates, right? Facilitates the relationship, improves the relationship, and allows the organizations to focus on the things that are more important.
Andrew, let me just jump in one on that
Yeah.
last point. So you raise up bots. That's absolutely true. I have been astounded that this number around 20%,
Yeah.
it has come down in the last decade, but it's amazing that it's still that much time and it's absolutely real. So bots, that's something that we're building into the system. But something else that we haven't talked about
Mhm.
is the opportunity for invoice financing or early payment as a way to relieve the pressure of when am I going to get paid if you're a supplier and you're
Mhm.
interested in cash flows. So um, definitely something TradeShift is actually pushing out the door this year or yeah earlier this year in terms of receivables financing.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just one more way to make it easier for your supplier to navigate the having to essentially finance their customers a little bit. Um,
Right. Right. Absolutely. Right. And again, now, right, we're in an environment where, the cost of capital, right, even if, rates are cut and maybe they'll be cut slightly again. I mean, very different environment on those costs than 3 or 4 years ago for sure. And so,
mm.
getting those assurances, providing those assurances to your strategic suppliers is very important. PO-based invoice rate. So, there has been, right, so when I started in this industry, 20 years, 25 years, almost 25 years ago, there's a big focus on, no PO, no pay. And while there's still a lot of value in having a closed loop transaction, particularly for large orders, it's a metric that should be tracked and understood. The main point is not that everything has to be on pay PO, but that procurement has involvement in it, has visibility into it, has the ability to influence it, and then it's not simply bypassing the typical processes, right? So most organizations have some dollar threshold level where if it's above this threshold, procurement should be involved in it because it can add value to the process. And so this is an indication, it's something to track, for sure. Number that also gone, continues to go up.
Mm.
So I think one of the questions, right, we often get, right, is, about companies and, when you start to move down, down the value chain to smaller organizations, we do see more organizations, using card, right? Particularly those that are at a point where they're not large enough to justify a full P2P system. And so we do see, more card spend, as a general trend. And so, sharing the number, not necessarily saying that this number should ultimately move to 100%. What you do want is an understanding of what the spend is and who your suppliers are, and that it's gone through the right processes. Um, Enabled suppliers, right? A great indication, right? So a great indicator of how successful your digital transformation is. It's when you look at the automation and business process reengineering, and now the words are digital transformation, right? When you're automating your P2P processes, there has been a general tendency to make that first large push, right, to go after the suppliers with the high volumes or that are strategic, or in your prioritization, should be focused on first. Maybe there's a second wave. There's not typically a third, there's not typically a fourth. From our perspective, the value of getting your suppliers onto these platforms, is a win-win for both organizations, and is something that shouldn't end, really should never end, right? I think you should continue to push forward to get that number as high as you possibly can. Doesn't mean that you will not have the one-offs where, the supplier's not in the system. That's fine, right? You have to, focus on and make smart business decisions. But ultimately, this is a great indicator of digital transformation and where you are overall.
One thing I'll just point
Yep.
out, Andrew,
Sure.
there's another category. So we have obviously we reach out on the buyer's behalf to onboard suppliers, and we do that. But there's a lot of suppliers who let's say they they become enabled to send invoices electronically,
Mhm.
but they don't necessarily realize that there's a platform there for them where
Mhm.
they can engage with their customer, collaborate, and and in fact do much more than simply send an invoice electronically. So it's like they're not necessarily offline. They're definitely enabled, but they're kind of not as engaged as they could be, because they could
Sure.
literally be finding other customers to send invoices electronically from the same platform. Anyways, it's a
Yeah. No, no, right. I mean, it's a great point, right? It used to be that suppliers were hesitant to become enabled on a platform. They didn't know if there may be some fees associated with this. They felt that like they were being sold. The systems are much more usable these days for all suppliers, and make a lot of sense for the visibility, and understanding of where they are in the process, and from a cash management perspective. Just real quick on the savings metrics, right? So these numbers have definitely been impacted by inflation and by suppliers increasing their prices, right? I mean, there have been several studies that show that, it's not all quote unquote inflation, but that suppliers are seeing the opportunities to raise their prices. So it's a different world from 5, 10 years ago, where suppliers were really training us that we could expect a lower price for a more innovative product in every ensuing contract cycle. Contract compliance, a metric here that, from our view should be significantly higher. This means that there's a lot of activity that's happening outside of your typical procurement processes, outside of your typical procurement systems, and that there's a cost to these transactions in a very real way. Um, I think we wanted to talk a little bit. So, Ron, this could be its own webinar, right? Just this slide here, right?
Absolutely.
What is a best-in-class AP operation? What is a best-in-class P2P operation, right? It has all of the different elements that you would think, right? This is not earth-shattering or bleeding edge, right? This is what this is, and this is what it will continue to be, right? Do you have the right vision, right? Are you working on the things that are most important to your organization? Are you thinking about the entirety of the process, right? So, a lot of people say source to pay. We say source to settle. Whatever terminology you want to put on the overall process. Are you thinking about it the way that your suppliers are? They have a single relationship with your organization. Um, you know, do they need multiple touch points across multiple systems, across multiple stakeholders, or not? Process efficiency, technology mastery, right? One of the things that is lacking within most organizations, is one, after the systems have been adopted, are they being used well, right? There's lots of functionality across the core applications in supply management, in source to pay, that aren't being accessed by most organizations today. And then, do you have a view into your metrics? Are you working to improve upon them? So best in
Mhm.
class P2P.
Wow. Hey, that was fantastic.
Mhm.
There are some questions. I am mindful of time. We're right perfectly. We didn't even practice that, Andrew. That was amazing. Right on the money. Um, so I'm just gonna try to wrap this up a little bit.
Sure.
For everyone who did ask questions, we will absolutely answer you via email. So we just went through AP and procurement metrics that matter in 2024, and I'm sure you don't want to do this, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you care to make a prediction for 2025?
Right. So we're working actually on our big trends and predictions reports. As one, I think that, many of the challenges that we've faced in P2P over the past couple of years are not going to go away. I think they will, in fact, intensify, particularly on the supply chain side, right? We had an election this week that means that there's going to be a new administration coming in January that has a different view of the world and will bring different policies to bear. Don't know what that means. It means that it'll be different. It may be dramatic. It may not be dramatic, but it's something that we'll have to pay attention to. It is likely that so there are global conflicts that are continuing. I don't have a crystal ball on those, but the trade conflicts and the rhetoric that I think has been coming out of the U.S. and will start to come out in 2025 portends that the the trade relationships that you have with your suppliers may be impacted by macro policies. So it's going to be even more important to understand who your suppliers are, where the value is in the supply chain, and do you have are you managing and mitigating your risk? On the AP side, I think, no matter who's in charge in all of the different countries, I think we've moved away from a low cost credit environment for some period of time. And so, AP's impact in helping organizations manage cash is only going to become more important, particularly with strategic suppliers. So AP's relationship with Treasury, AP's relationship with procurement is only going to be more important in 2025. And the last thing on the AP side, when what we've started to see over the past couple of years is that young workers who have entered AP are now seeing opportunities to move out of AP into larger finance roles, into larger operational roles within the organization. AP is becoming a launching pad, a career launching pad.
Interesting. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. An absolutely riveting conversation. Everyone on the call, thank you as well for taking the time out of your busy day. You'll get that email follow-up. There might be a survey, there might be a link to the report that we've just been discussing. So I'll just say thank you one last time. Thanks, Andrew. I look forward to the next time.
thank you.